So the first thing we're going to be dealing with is how you can do if statements in Vue. So maybe now you want to have some text. So we'll just put in a p tag with some like, ooh, text. But you only want this text to show. Say if you've got show text as a variable here set to true. And true is lowercase t in JavaScript. So how would one go about doing that in VueJS? Well, it's actually very simple because built into VueJS, there's this funky little vif keyword. And vif is a keyword which, when this is true, so you set vif equal to, oh, not like that. You set vif equal to a property on your data here. So, for example, show text.
This is conditional rendering.
Yes. So if you set this equal to true, you see this shows up here in text. And if this was false, then you wouldn't see it. Likewise, we can also add in a button here. It's like toggle text. This would be a very common use case. So you can do this dynamically. So again, we can use the @ sign to trigger an event and do @click. We can very simply make this set show text equal to the opposite of what show text is equal to now. That's how you invert something. I presume you've done that before. So now we have this toggle text button. And if we click this, you see ooh text appears. And if we click again, ooh text disappears. So how's everyone with that? That seems a bit simpler than what we were doing a bit earlier.
Yep. The @ sign again is.
This is just a shorthand. Remember,
shorthand
for
but which one is it again?
V on.
V on. That's good.
Now there's a couple of things to know about what VF is doing and how it's behaving. The first is to realize that VF actually doesn't just hide this ooh text. If you go down here and go into div app, you'll see there's actually nothing there. There's only our button. So the ooh text doesn't stick around. It's gone completely. And you can see again, if I click this text, if you keep your eye on the inspector, you'll see it actually pops back in. And then if I toggle it again, it physically disappears.
It becomes becomes a comment.
So Vue puts in this little placeholder comment here, just to that's kind of the only thing that could tell it's maybe here. But from the purpose of the DOM, from the purpose of the HTML model, it's like it never existed. So that's very important because if you, and we'll get into this later, but if you have any lifecycle hooks, so these are like functions that trigger when say a p tag is created or destroyed, these will get called appropriately when you use VF because you're physically removing an element or adding it back in. Now there is one main downside to this, which is that adding and removing stuff to the DOM, especially if you've got a lot of things, is very slow. So in our case here, it's all right because we're only adding in one thing or we're only taking away one thing. But if you were to say have 1,000 p tags here and you were adding and removing them all with a button, that would be very slow and it would probably cause your page to slow down. Cool. So if there is an alternative to VIF, so say for example, you're worried, you have got one of these use cases where say you've got a lot of things and you want to show and you want to toggle their existence. You want to use a VIF, but you're worried about performance. There is an alternative called vShow. So if you do vShow, and again, it still takes in a Boolean true false here as its argument. You see by default we have it set to false, so it disappears. But now, if we go into our inspector you'll see it's still here, but it's just been given the display style none. Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, for some reason I can't get, even with VF, I can't seem to get it working.
Okay. Have you managed to? Have you got your Vue instance set up, like mine is?
Do you know what I think? Oh yeah.
What have you done?
I've put a semicolon in the data step.
Oh, you silly Billy.
Yeah. Goodbye.
You don't need to put semicolons in data. It's kind of weird like that.
Yeah.
So vshow is basically hiding it as opposed to actually deleting it.
Yes. So as you can see here, so remember in CSS, if you set display none, that basically just means don't render it. But the p tag is still here effectively. It's not going to be shown on the browser, but it still exists in the DOM.
Yeah.
Which if you have lots of objects, is going to be much more performance friendly. The main downside of it is that you won't trigger lifecycle hooks, which we'll get into. So effectively, you might want to have a function, as I said before, you might want to have a function that calls automatically whenever, say, for example, a paragraph tag is created that does some fancy stuff. If you use vshow, that won't get called every time because you're still keeping the old one around effectively. You're not recreating it from scratch. So that's something to be aware of. Usually, it's preferred, and there's some other stuff as well, but it's preferred if you use vif, unless you have to use vshow, rather than the other way around. That's the general gist that I've seen. Mainly because vif keeps the DOM nice and small, because it means that there is a trade-off, because yes, while it is slow to add and remove stuff from the DOM, like that, the actual operation is slow. For general use, you also just want to have less items on the DOM. So if you actually physically remove unneeded items, then that will give you a boost to performance. That makes sense?
Yep.
Cool. So say you want to do vif, but now we say we want to have, this is some text, and this is some more text. This is a big text. But say we want to vif all of this. Well, we could put a vif on each individual one of these, but that would be kind of annoying to have to do. So there's actually a better way. If we want to make all of these vifable, and this is kind of HTML5 more than VueJS, but there's a thing built into HTML5 called template. Have any of you guys used template before?
No.
The template is a magic tag in HTML. The template tag. So actually, I'll take this out here. If we see, I've taken out all the VueJS now. By the way, if you observe. But if we render this, you'll see that the template tag never appears in the inspector. It's almost like it wasn't there. So you might think this is utterly useful. Not utterly useful, utterly useless. Like, for example, we couldn't see it. This isn't useful if you wanted to do CSS styling or anything. Like, this template tag literally doesn't exist. But it is useful because we can still apply all our Vue directives to this template. So one thing we can do, for example, make this a vif show text. And now, for example, because we've set it equal to false, you'll see that there's just the button, and then if I toggle it, all three of them appear and disappear, even though they're not like parented to each other. So you could make this template like a div or something. That's one other way you could do it. Oh, not that. Keeps doing this. So you could make this a div, but then the problem is that all of these sub elements are children of this outer div. And maybe you don't want that. Maybe you just want them to all be siblings, just with the button for whatever way you're doing it.
Yeah.
So in that case, you'd use template. That's what template does. Cool.
Wait, Rob.
Yep.
Under what situation would you not want
To use a div.
Yeah.
Well, maybe, you know, maybe you're styling, you know, maybe you've got some sort of style in here that's styling all the divs. Or maybe you want, maybe these p tags, yeah, they've also got a bit of JavaScript on, and you want to select this button, yeah. It's much easier for them to select this button if they're a sibling to it, so if they're directly next to it, compared to if they're like nested within a div. So it's kind of like, it might be convenient for you. You know, you don't always want to nest things because that makes it harder for different objects to talk to each other. And it might also make them harder to rearrange and stuff. You know, you'd probably want to use a temp, you know, if all of these three elements, Ben, if they're all like related to the same thing. So, you know, say if this is like a card with all the, you know, with like a user information on it and a picture of the user. Yeah. In that case, you probably would want to put it inside of a div because effectively those things all come as one group and they should all be together.
Okay.
But maybe you've got elements that are on like completely different sides of the page. Yeah. You know, maybe you've got like a button in the top right hand corner and a little indicator in the you know, lower left.
Yeah.
Or anything like that. And you know, if you think about that, if you had that inside of a div, you'd have to then style all those elements inside of the div to go into the right spot and everything, and it'd be a right pain. So having them, you know, you want them to effectively be independent of each other when they're on the page, but also be able to remove them in really easily. So that's when you use a template.
Rob, why is it that if you use so in this case, if I use vif, it works.
Yeah.
I can remove all three things in the template, but if I use vshow, it doesn't hide them. Yeah.
So vshow, because effectively what vshow is trying to do is vshow is trying to add the display. So vshow again is like a shorthand. What vshow is trying to do is vshow is shorthand for bind style equal. I remember we do the curly braces when we do styles. Display display none effectively. Well, it's doing this, then it has some conditional if statement here, so it's none. So we put in here conditional if statement, show text. So what? Huh?
Oh, I'm just saying hello, Caroline.
Oh, hi, Caroline.
Hello. I'm not interrupting.
Right.
Saying hello.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't see your message saying you're on a call.
That's all right. No worries at all.
So, Dan, you still here?
Yeah.
So so vshow is identical to this vbind style that I've got here that does this, that actually sets the display equal to show text, and then if it's true, it makes it none, and if it's nothing, it just leaves it at the default value.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the thing is the template tag doesn't exist in the DOM, so VueJS can't add a style to it.
Okay.
So that's why it doesn't work.
Oh.
Yeah, if you want to do vshow, you'd have to do it on each individual element. That's just how vshow works. Or you'd have to make a parent div. It's only because of vif is kind of magic. If that makes sense. Fab. Yeah, so there's one other cool little thing you can do with vf, and that's that. Of course, you've got an if statement here, but just like regular code, there's also else statements. So we can do p and then v else, and be like nothing to see here exclamation mark. And as you can see, so by default show text is false. So this vif condition doesn't show, but then this v else condition does show. And the important thing to stress is that the v-else must be immediately after relevant v-if.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. And just like there's also a P, I think there is anyway. I think there's a VueJS else if. Yeah. So there's also a v else if, one of these. So if you want to effectively chain them, you can also do v else if, you know, and then it's another question mark here, like.
Is the dash
some other...
after else?
Yeah.
Like between else and if. Cool.
Yeah. That's the same as elif in Python.
Yeah, yeah.
Cool.
Thank you.